This is Flock and Hive, a place to explore the things you always wanted to know more about, as well as the things you didn't know you wanted to know. And this week,
I work with the nervous system rather than with the mind, because what's happening in the mind is symptomatic of what's happening in the body.
We speak to somatic sexologist Emily King.
hello, it is us, and this is our first recording since we actually went live. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. I sound a bit like Darth Vader, but I'm good.
There's a lot of it going around.
It's not COVID though. I've done a test, so it's no vid.
Well, I'm sorry you're feeling rubbish, but hopefully you're happy like I am that we're finally live out in the world.
Finally birthed the triplets, the OG 3 podcast.
So how do you feel now the babies are out?
Sore. Joking. No, really good. There's a vulnerability to putting yourself out there. And we actually are we're being, I would say, authentic and our true selves. So you're kind of in the firing line of anything that's coming at you. But what we're talking about and the people we're talking about, people are responding really well to.
Yeah, I agree. And it has forced me also to look at the positives, because you put a lot of yourself out there, and to get that feedback, I think I'm taking that and I'm writing it down and I'm sticking it on my wall, the positive things. I've had a couple of really lovely messages. One from someone saying that they're actually going to include smelling and essential oils, very specific ones, as part of the retreat that they're going to be running next weekend. And I just thought, wow, I love that this podcast has already made that little difference there. So that's my kind of glimmer, my good news I'm taking with me.
Mine is that we've survived a relationship. But, I'm getting real here. Flock and Hive is something you've been developing for years and years. I came on board very late. And so that's a challenge in itself. But working with your sibling as well has been a challenge, hasn't it? We've had to understand how to speak to each other without going into sibling scraps,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Those, we're reverting to being age 10 again.
If anyone has worked with a sibling before, you have to actually be adults with each other. We want to be as professional as possible with this. I don't know how much we're pulling it off. But that was a real challenge, like finding that relationship. That was a brand new relationship in a lifelong connection we have.
I think it's helped that we've been editing some conversations that we've both found really interesting. And this week's is no exception, is it? So we'll be talking to Emily King, who is a sexologist. And I think you particularly had a lot of questions about this, didn't you?
Oh, it's the sex part, it's the somatic part, it's the coming together of that, just everything. It's right up my street.
Well, before we go into that conversation, should we talk about our word for the week? Because it's related in a couple of different ways, isn't it? And the word is gynarchy.
Is it an anarchical gynecologist?
It could be. Answers on a postcard.
Oh, that's terrifying, isn't it? Imagine someone feeling quite anarchistic, is that the word? When they're looking at your vag.
Well, that's just it. It's not about vag. And this is where I realise that I'm actually quite an idiot. It's about women. Gynarchy comes from the Greek word gyne, which means woman, and archein, which means to rule or to govern. I always thought gyne was particularly about vaginas.
So did I.
It's a word that's often used when you're describing some kind of social or political system where women hold the predominant power or leadership roles rather than men. And yeah, so it's all about women. It's not about vages ruling the world, it's women.
Well, some might argue that they're one and the same thing. Sexist bastards.
Sexists. But I mean, that's just me showing my ignorance there. Gyne means women.
If women were in power, there would be this just underlying acceptance of the menstrual cycle, for one, and B, I think it would all be in sync, which means we would all just have like a week off in that shitty week leading up to it where we're all suicidal and really fat and just have spots and want chocolate.
That and perimenopause and menopause as well. Yeah, I think it would be a completely different working day, wouldn't it? And probably a completely different working week. A lot's been discussed about that recently, I guess, about the workplace is not set up for women's cycles because we are very different every week of the month.
But if you believed the system now, nothing would possibly get done.
I think we'd have a lot less war, though, and I'm fine with that. We'd all be working together a bit more, wouldn't we? I like to think.
Yeah, and there wouldn't be actual leaders. I think there would just be lots of people with lots of buddies in a position of mutual respect. A bit like Barbie.
Yes, Barbie has a gynarchy, which is interesting because the last thing she says in the film is she asked to see her gynecologist.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, maybe there's a hidden meaning in there as well. Well, actually, there was a lot of not quite so hidden meanings in there. I think I need to stop talking now for a bit. My own ignorance about the word gyne reminds me of my own ignorance about the word somatic as well, because I sort of thought I knew what that was, but it turns out I'm completely wrong.
What did you think, pray tell?
I thought it was something to do with relaxing.
Okay. I am aware of somatic purely because I have had years and years of therapy where we've worked in a somatic therapeutic way. So, but when I was first introduced to it, my only recollection of it was psychosomatic addict insane from Prodigy. So there were quite a few weeks when I was sitting across from my therapist and just had breathe and best ya, come play my game, I'll test ya, like just going round and round in my head whilst I was trying to also get in touch with what my body was trying to tell me.
On fire starter, twisted fire starter, psychosomatic, addict insane. Yeah, I like that song actually.
Wrong song. You've just mixed two songs. But
What?
that's okay. I'll let it go.
So another seamless link to our guest. Let's speak to somebody who really does know what somatic means, and she is a sexologist, and she is Emily King. Here is what she had to say. So you are a sex and relationships therapist who is trained in somatic sex therapy and bodywork, which is absolutely fascinating. Can you tell me more about that, what that is? But before that, of course, tell us about you and how you got here.
Absolutely. I always knew that I wanted to go down a therapeutic route, but there was something kind of holding me back from psychology, just a purely talk therapy route. It wasn't really doing it for me, but I didn't really know if I had any other options. And I started researching, and the thing that kept coming up was somatic sexology, and somatic means of the body. So that is, rather than a mind-based approach, it's a body-based approach. And it just grabbed me and pulled me right in, and I am in love with it.
Wow. I mean, well, tell us more about somatic sex therapy. What does that mean in practice? How does it work? And how do you work with people on that?
So the easiest way for me to describe this is, instead of a therapist saying, you know, Helena, what do you think about that? It's, and how do you feel about that? Where is that feeling? Let's connect it to a body-based sensation and really analyze that emotion from the body's point of view. So I work with the nervous system rather than with the mind, because what's happening in the mind is symptomatic of what's happening in the body. And people talk about this mind-body split quite a lot, you know, talk therapy being that top-down approach and a somatic approach being bottom-up. And that's quite a logistical explanation. But there's not a disconnect. There's never a disconnect. It's like a terrible relationship that just needs better communication between the two. There will never be a disconnect in anyone, no matter how disembodied they believe they are. There is always something. The real thing about somatic therapy is I stayed away from it for so long because I thought it was woo-woo.
Right.
And I had so much resistance to it, which is quite interesting because I'm an open-minded person. I always have been, but there was something about it that I just couldn't get with it. It just annoyed me because I thought that like none of this can be real. And the more that I've been researching it now, what I thought was woo-woo is neuroscience.
I mean, there's an explosion of interest in these kind of things, but not just what we're talking about now, but all kinds of sensory crossover and using our other senses and bodies to treat our minds. Like physical movement is a huge part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, what is body work? Really, it's quite hard to actually clarify, because in sessions sometimes there's no touch. That is another part of my practice. I do offer one-way touch. But body work isn't just that. It can be up, it can be moving an emotion. For example, I specialize in the needs of women, but I work with couples as well. but women and female sexuality is really my passion. And anger is something that comes up all the time, especially in relation to sexuality. And that's something you have to move through the body, because, you know, we talk about being stuck. I'm sure you've heard even friends and family say, I just feel really stuck. I don't really understand why, I just have this feeling. And that's the felt sense talking. You know, we have all of these idioms that we use, and we never connect them to actually how that describes an embodied state. People like to actually talk themselves down quite a lot. You know, they'll say, oh Jesus, I'm so disembodied, I haven't got a clue what's going on in my body. Yet when they speak, maybe they'll touch their heart, or they'll go into themselves, and that's all embodied emotion. And you just have to notice. And really, by just supporting someone to notice these things actually gives them this huge sense of confidence of, oh, actually, maybe I do notice what's going on in my body, because it's not that hard. And that's why I love somatic therapy, because it is in nature quite basic. We don't need to over intellectualize everything. Just notice it and work with it and work through it. So like anger, you need to work through any kind of activated state and emotion. Otherwise, it can become embedded on a cellular level, really, and you'll keep going back to that. It'll become, you know, automatic in your behavior. So it's challenging your system to actually complete and process and be able to move on and get unstuck.
It's because your body doesn't lie, I suppose. That's the thing. Your mind can block out all sorts of things.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Have you seen Sex, Love and Goop?
I haven't actually, no.
Get it on the to-do list, because that is it's just a really handy way of understanding what sexological bodywork is, and it not be, a seedy, sleazy, traditional approach to sex. It's completely different.
But I suppose a lot of people might go, oh gosh, that's terrifying. Do I have to get naked in front of like people and sort of be shown what buttons to press, etc.? Like what do your sessions look like, for example, in that regard? Because it's not seedy, it's it's very much about sort of teaching and understanding. So how do you do that in a session?
So it's completely different in every session, and it depends what the client's boundaries are, because of course I do work with the vulva, I do work with the vagina, and that's my main chunk of one-to-one touch now. I've really honed in on what elements are really important to me and what I want to focus on, and that's a massive part of it. Vaginal internal work, and we call that genital mapping. It's actually a process of sitting with a person and working through their genitals. This part is your labia, this is your inner labia, this is your urethra. And it's quite fascinating, actually. Sometimes I encourage women to actually do it themselves and to name the body part. This is my. So it's claiming it in a sense, and that's really been the theme of my bodywork sessions, is it's reclaiming their bodies as theirs. This is mine, I'm learning about it. And because I don't work in a sexual way, I don't work with arousal. I work in a very, very educational way, in a very nurturing way, because, being a woman, there's a lot of expectation on us to perform sexually, even if that's just through how we look. So whenever you're in a room with a practitioner, and yes, we may be working with your genitals, there is literally no expectation on you to do anything. And knowing that, and the body being able to sense that, is just, it opens up so much possibility. So this process of genital mapping, and women doing this, and that active learning, which I love, because it's just so practical. And there's a somatic sexologist called Kafid and Jessie. They're brilliant, and they talk about our genitals being the genital hole. We know how to work with the rest of the body, but by God, leave the genitals out, we can't go there. And that creates like a psychological hole as well. that we become just dissociated from this very important part of our bodies that is crucial for pleasure. So that process of teaching women, this is what this is, how does it feel when you touch that? And within those bodywork sessions as well, is any emotion coming up for you as this part of your body is touched? And I have never, ever expected the amount of emotion that is held in the pelvis. It blows my mind every single time I have a session.
And what kind of thing is coming out of that then? Is it, and I guess, are people surprising themselves with what they're finding?
Yeah. So the thing is, when you work with the body, you're working with the implicit memory. So our mind works in an explicit way. So that will remember things like what you did yesterday, what you had for dinner. That's a very explicit memory. But trauma doesn't work in that way. It works in an implicit sense. And this is where, the very famous book title, The Body Keeps the Score. This is where this research comes from. And it's relatively new, which is wild. And it's incredible work. But trauma is stored not cognitively, it's stored through feelings, sensations, emotions that sometimes we actually can't put words to because there weren't words involved. There was a feeling. Something happened physically, implicitly. So with somatic therapy, it's a process of making the implicit explicit. It's a process of unearthing that. So when you take an approach that really focuses and values safety, which when I say that, it doesn't sound very radical, but I know when I've been through therapy in the past, safety was not there. Never once was safety part of the collaborative experience between me and practitioner, which now it's great that it's informed my practice, but I just find it so bizarre. Why would we not check with clients? Do you feel safe? Do you trust me as a person to go to these places with you? It's like in any sexual situation, you wouldn't expect people to come in and know what to do and feel comfortable with it. I earn that. And I respect that. And the body, again, can tell. So whenever you reach a point of safety, that means more is able to come up. Creating safety in the body happens really quite gradually because I resist going into the state of overwhelm with clients because that can actually just be too stressful and then can take steps back. But whenever you're able to work to their safety, things free up to the point where it's not a big deal. For example, I have had clients saying that they have had flashbacks to childhood trauma and occasionally abuse, and they've been able to manage those flashbacks because they have a newfound sense of safety. So the body has known it's safe enough for us to let this go. And it's really common with trauma, of course, that you can't exactly remember what happened. And a lot of this is because it was precognitive trauma, which is really quite common. So that means that you literally don't have words for that because you didn't know how to speak when you experienced it. So you cannot verbalize it. So it needs to be felt, to be processed.
This might seem like a really dumb question, but in the times where that comes up and those flashbacks happen, are there any cases where people had completely forgotten that happened to them and maybe they were coming to you for another reason, for example?
So how you can tell if that's the case is if people almost allude to it without meaning to. So it's quite interesting. It's through things like, I have no idea why I feel like this. And they experience almost an existential dread. And people will say, I've never experienced any kind of abuse. Why do I feel like this? And that can be because it was actually before they had verbal cognitive memory.
Right. I'm thinking about the reasons people come and see you, because I can imagine that sometimes they know why, but other times they don't. But what are sort of the classic reasons people seek you out?
Low libido is number one, of course, and it's always, I've got a low libido, please help me to have sex again. And that's usually the angle, rather than wanting to actually explore it for them. It's usually for a partner. And when I come in, something that I want people to experience when they're with me, when they're coming to sessions and afterwards, just pure excitement for what they're doing. Because it is bloody exciting. And I don't think therapy needs to make you feel shit. We feel shit about so many things. Let's get excited about our bodies, especially when we're talking about sex and pleasure. Of course, that's exciting. And really, when I have women come into me saying that it's affecting their relationships, they want to have sex, my first thing is, well, we need to find your motivating factor of why you would want to have sex. Because I'm not going to support someone to have sex that they don't want to have. Why would we want to do that?
Oh gosh.
So low libido is definitely number one. And I have a lot of clients who are recovering from sexual and relational trauma. And it's, the issue is whenever you've experienced something like that, it doesn't feel safe to come into the body. So really seeking support for that and being held in that is extremely important. So I use a method called pendulation. So it's almost like, imagine a pendulum. So we can pendulate a client into a state of discomfort, go to something that maybe feels really difficult to go to. The second that feels too much, pendulate back to safety. And what that's doing is basically increasing window of tolerance. So it's actually, I can stay in this discomfort. That's how you become emotionally intelligent and resilient. So trauma work is a really big part of it. And some want to explore their sexuality, explore whether kinks are kinks or if they're related to past trauma. And it's fascinating what people come in with as their objective. This is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to explore. By week 3, we're on a completely different route, and they are delighted and excited about it because they didn't even know that it was an option.
Do you think this is something that people should just be doing anyway, even if they don't necessarily feel the need to have some therapy about it, but it's like maintenance?
Well, maintenance, it's funny you say maintenance because talking about vaginal work, that is so key to my emotional maintenance. Like I call it my MOTs when I do my internal work. And it couldn't be, I explain it, I'm like, it couldn't be less sexual. It's really me like checking things out, making sure I'm on top of everything. And that skill of knowing how to maintain yourself emotionally, physically, mentally, holistically is so important. And that's exactly what you learn through this kind of approach of therapy, because I'm not a magician. We're basically writing you like a how-to manual, how to maintain well-being. And it's so important that people know how to do this because it's life skills, it's relationship skills, and it's skills that you continue to use. People will say, oh, well, you only go to a sex therapist if something's incredibly wrong. Yeah. But the more that I've worked with people over this last year, if you want to change anything in your life, go in the sex store. Ooh. Because it will have such an impact across the spectrum. Things just show up clearest through sex.
Give me an example of that. So say I want to start a new business. How would I go in the sex store for that?
Brilliant, because it's empowering. Sexuality, if you are working with your sexual energy and if you're able to funnel that through into business, those things very complementary. So if you desire and money, they're a great match, aren't they?
Oh yeah, sex is always the answer.
It is.
Gosh, Emily King, it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So hit me. Thoughts?
I loved this so much for so many reasons. It spanned all the genres of everything I love, which is talking about sex, talking about vaginas, talking about somatic therapy, because I have learned about this last few years and I'm a real believer in it, and where those two come together, but also on its own, like somatic therapy goes so much further than just the sexuality. But my thing I love the most that I've picked out of this is how she talks about the reclamation of our sexuality as women.
Yeah.
I mean, the backdrop growing up in the 90s, I know we always reference this, but this is our experience. our idea of sexuality was a real slim, that, there was no spectrum. We were not offered that at all. There was the top 100 FHM sexiest women. And that was what was expected of you sexually. For eons, our sexuality's never been our own, has it? It's always been for the male gaze, for the other. And so I love that finally there's an awakening. Mm. If you look back at those FHM front covers, even me, like an able bodied woman, was feeling alienated from that. So imagine the extent of bad feeling you had for yourselves when you saw those images. And what's even more fascinating now is all those women who are on those front covers 30 years later have told how they were anorexic, pressured, airbrushed the fuck out of. It just wasn't a happy place.
Yeah, I mean, you've reminded me of Gail Porter's bottom being projected onto the Houses of Parliament. I mean, can you imagine how Gail Porter feels now? Because I know she's got alopecia, but and like she's a lot older, but that's kind of her legacy. And when people meet her now and then really remember what that is, that must be really, really, really tough as well. Especially with all the things you were saying about how it was at the time for them.
And what's really sad is that we all believed it. I was that 15-year-old girl believing that A, that it was real, and B, that it's what I needed to be.
But this was even before Instagram. I mean, can you imagine what it's going to be like for our kids? I mean, we don't need to have that discussion. Millions of people have had it, but it's terrifying. My kids don't have phones yet, neither do yours.
No, and I don't really ever want them to.
No,
But
no.
I've got to say, the thing with Instagram, that is a kind of double-edged sword because, well, certainly my experience, my algorithms, yes, it's a cesspit and it's dangerous and it promotes unattainable standards of beauty and thinness and hotness and it defines sexuality. But there is a backlash to that, which is also on Instagram. Like people like Tova Lee, do you follow her?
I
And she
don't know.
talks, she did a whole show and a whole book about reading people's sex secrets, and but like 40 something married people, and really represents that bracket. And she's really good for body positivity and body acceptance, and posts pictures of her and is basically reclaiming her sexuality very outwardly. And so yes, Instagram is damaging, but the more like I want your daughters to see this, because
Yeah.
it's just going to be normalizing what femininity looks like. It's not FHM airbrushing, and B, what it sounds like. It's our words. We're allowed to talk about it.
Mm.
And also, Bryony Gordon.
Yes.
Yes, I'm reading her book Mad Woman at the moment, and she's actually, I think she's bang in between us, her age actually. And she talks about how the magazines in the 90s, with cellulite on the front, how dare she? It just really formed the shame that you needed to feel about your bodies and how you had to fit in. And so I'm loving that all these voices of women our age are accessible on social media, and for our children, for my boys, your daughters, it's just really important that they see that side too. The whole point of somatic therapy, it's the bottom up way of looking at it. So you're looking at the feeling rather than the thought. I love her pendulative idea where you're open, you're widening that window of being able to get a bit nearer to the trauma. It's just very welcoming. And yeah, I just think the key word is safety.
Mm. And the conversation about the pendulation reminds me of hypnotherapy in a way, but actually all of these things are linked. The fact that when she first heard about this, she thought it was woo and then realized actually it's neuroscience. There's also Jungian therapy as well. I don't know do you know what that is?
Shadow self, Carl Jung talking about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is Carl Jung, but it's about exploring the collective unconsciousness. So it's about that unconsciousness, and yeah, having therapy based on things that you don't know are a problem necessarily. But art therapy comes under that as well.
I just think any kind of therapy, if it helps just one person, it's not woo-woo. It has worked. It is a success. And she's clearly helping all these women, and not just abuse survivors, even people without necessarily a problem, but who just want to get in touch with themselves again. And, like we keep banging on about in Flock and Hive, but unlearn all the stuff that is keeping us stuck. And she talks about being stuck a lot too. I learnt about somatizing through my therapist, and it wasn't related to sexuality, even though that always comes up. This was about 7 to 8 years ago. She introduced me to this, and even talking about it then, I would get slight side eye, little eye rolls, because it was all a bit feely. Especially as I was evangelizing Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. Do you know about that?
I have heard about it, but tell me more.
Essentially, this book is a glossary of ailments and then affirmations of what's actually really going on, what the feelings are. So I actually have it with me here. Give me an ailment, and it can be anything, and I will tell you what you need.
Hemorrhoids. Does she say anything about that?
She does. So is it all alphabetized nicely. Oh, I think it comes under bowels. So how? Hold on, I'm looking it up. How do you spell hemorrhoids? Is it H-A? H-E?
I think we spell it Piles. That it might be under that.
I bet it is as well. Oh no, hemorrhoids. All right, hemorrhoids. See also anus.
I'm such a child. Sorry.
This is what she says. So, hemorrhoids is the fear of deadlines, anger of the past, and afraid to let go and feeling burdened. And then the affirmation is I release all that is unlike love. There is a time and space for everything I want to do.
That's like taking your mental prunes.
Yeah, exactly. Your mental laxatives. But my point is, this has been talked about for so long, but has been sidelined. You could only find that book in the little witch shop in Waltham Abbey, which I bloody love.
You know, Emily also mentioned The Body Keeps the Score, which has been around for a while, and even I've heard of it, but now I need to read it. And we'll put all of this stuff in the show notes as well, so it's easy to find. So so talking to Emily, this is very much about getting you to feel emotions through that. It's she says there is some touch, some one way touch, which I'm presuming is you touching yourself with guidance, but to be honest, I'm not actually sure.
Oh, were you too scared to ask, are your fingers in her fanny at this point?
I was, yeah, I was, but maybe if we get her back, we can ask that question. But it strikes me that her approach is so very different from someone that you've shown me on Instagram. Is it the Muscle Whisperer?
Yeah.
Tell people about her.
So the Muscle Whisperer is this woman in LA. She's not that classic, witchy type candles and incense and like her look and feel. She's tattooed. She's quite gnarly, but proud of it. So she is a masseuse of sorts that basically pummels out the trauma in your body. And she puts up these really candid videos, sometimes of her clients just screaming and writhing, some of them crying. But the whole time, what is beautiful is that this muscle whisperer, masseuse, is holding them and telling them they're safe. And it's just, again, the conversation about what is stored physically in the body. And we've just ignored it for so long. Like Emily talks about, it's, from the mind down, it's about intellectualizing it all. Even she says, don't overthink it. Just feel the feeling, notice it, work with it. And that's the process.
If someone's really pummeling your leg really hard, though, how do you know? I wonder, just like, how do you know whether that, when you're screaming in pain, that is something you need to let go, or whether it just fucking hurts?
Well, I guess the proof is in the recovery and how you feel after. But from what I've seen, it looks quite instantaneous. These people feel lighter immediately.
It's scary to think about going to have that, isn't it? But so necessary, I guess, for many.
I think the whole thing is scary. The idea of getting your kit off and letting, talking to your vagina, your vulva, letting someone talk to it in that not sexualized way is more awkward. I mean, it's kind of easy to put the veneer of sexuality on, like especially, when you've been taught that it's for the performance. So to actually be still and more nurturing with it, because she doesn't call it, it's not seedy, it's not sexual, is it? It's educational.
Yeah, definitely.
And this brings up another of my favorite topics because I just love to talk about vaginas and all that. People labeling their kids' genitals. Across the board, growing up, boys had willies, girls had all sorts of weird shit. We had front bottoms. How
I'd forgotten about front bottoms, but it's not a bottom.
It's saying, or like private parts, whereas boys had their willies that were hanging out. No shame. We had to hide it. Don't call it what it is. Even like now, vulva. It's only just really being talked about, and it's basically the equivalent of the willy. It's the outward bit you see. Very beautifully, a lot of my female friends are flying the flag who have daughters, and they have taught their girls that this is your vulva. In the bath, that's your vulva. But that is just an absolute shining the light on the inequality of the way we grew up as well.
Thank God that is changing. My 12-year-old, as we speak, is having those anatomy lessons as part of reproduction. And it's very much all about vulva. Yes, and I have taught my children that you do not wee out of your vagina as well. I must say, all of these words aren't as bad as the things that in my 20s, my male contemporaries would call vaginas. I mean, gaping axe wound?
Exactly. Well, yeah, they were always really derogatory, weren't they? Like beef curtains, or even, let's face it, the absolute worst and best, in my opinion, swear word, the C word, is a derogatory, hellish, disgusting word, which is basically derived from female genitalia, and that just says it all. It's to be demonized.
Stench trench.
Oh, are you just going to go on? Carry on.
I'm sorry. They're all coming to me now. Anyway.
Love this subject. It could just go on for hours and hours because it's the cultural backdrop, it's individual relationships and relationships with yourself, with your partners. And she talks about the genital hole, lols, by the way. How, is if you take out one body part, it's just a non-holistic way of healing. So you're just hitting a boundary and a blockage already.
Sorry, I'm still laughing in my head about beef curtains. I don't know why. I've always found that really funny.
Yeah, but you're not doing the movement any favors by laughing. It's not funny. It's very serious.
No, it's not funny. Sorry, it's not funny. It's not funny. There are not only many more conversations that we could have about this, but there's work I immediately want to do on this, especially in a business way, like how do I go through the sex store, etc.
Are you going to go and get your fanny out to be therapized?
Possibly, but I will have a wax. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget that you can find articles related to everything that we're talking about here over on our website, flockandhive.com, and you can follow us on all socials at Flock and Hive.
And next week, we'll be talking to Professor David Nutt about the science behind your hangover. And he also discusses some home truths about alcohol that can be quite alarming. So if this is something that could maybe trigger you, be aware that that is a large part of the conversation.
But an important one to listen to if you can. And I'm talking to myself here as a drinks writer. But until next week, thanks again. Ta-ra!
Bye!